we are back on the 0 Hour. I, as always, am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. And joining us once again is our man in France. Oh, well, he's not really ours, but we talk to him from time to time. Cole Stangler is a France-based journalist and author who concentrates on the left, labor movements, and the like. He was, I think the last time we talked to him, he was based in Paris, but he has moved to Marseille. And he is at work on a book right now, so hence if it's not out already. And so without any further ado, I guess, Cole Stangler, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, thanks as always for having me.
And what's the deal with the book? I forgot the timeline.
That's fine. The book will be ready next, hopefully everything goes well, next fall. So it's a book about Paris and working class Paris and gentrification in the city. So next fall.
Oh yeah, it should be great. You know, the last time I was in Paris, I saw that you could get. I say that like I'm a jet setter, and I was there last Tuesday. But you can get this left book. This book of where you can basically take a walking tour of all the left historical sites in Paris, which there are incredible amounts. So I look forward to doing that. But that, and I should add before we get to the business at hand that we're recording this on Thursday. You're in Marseille, as the sports announcers say. A lot of heartbreak in Marseille tonight, I would guess, over the World Cup, because I'm sure a lot of people were rooting hard for Morocco, as was I. I'm a quarter French, but 100% anti-colonialist. So my heart was with Morocco. How were people taking it there?
There was a lot of joy too. It should be said. I mean, I think most people here were supporting France, but you do have a huge community of. I'm not necessarily a huge community of Moroccan people or people of Moroccan descent, but you have a big community in. I don't necessarily always like the word community. You have a lot of people of Algerian descent living in Marseille, of course, and so it was actually interesting having some of the people of Algerian descent supporting the Moroccans, despite the sort of international geopolitical rivalries between the countries. So a lot of support for Morocco in that respect, and also people that are of both Moroccan and French nationality that are
right.
sort of between both. Something similar to like U.S. Mexico. I don't know. I'm trying to think about it in American terms. So, you have families that are sort of on both sides. But it was it all went down very well, and a lot of celebrating last night and fireworks and whatnot, and hopefully we'll see what happens on Sunday with the game against Argentina.
Yeah, well, by the time, let's see, if people hear this on Saturday, they won't know. They see the show on Monday. They'll know we don't. So this is our time capsule. And Cole, you've been writing for your own Patreon, for Jacobin and elsewhere. And, one of the stories that I thought would be really interesting for our audience, and our mutual friend, my producer Troy Miller, actually brought it to my attention, was in Jacobin. And the headline was, France's most degrading talk show is promoting far-right politics. And I don't think you wrote the subheading, probably Jacobin did, but it's easy to think of French public life as more highbrow than its U.S. counterpart, but France's top-rated talk show is fusing politics and entertainment, and it's a key part of a billionaire-funded effort to normalize far-right talking points, which, we've seen this movie here in the United States, right? We know how this one plays out, and in Great Britain as well. But B, tell us about the program you addressed there.
Yes, I'm glad you wanted to talk about this, because it's such a topic that interests me a lot here, and hasn't really been talked a lot about in the Anglo kind of American world. So this talk show host that we're referring to is named as Cyril Hanouna. And he has a show that's called Touche pas à mon poste, which means don't touch my TV set, which is a play on words off of actually an anti-racist slogan developed in the 80s, which was Touche pas à mon pote, which is don't touch or hands off my pal. This is hands off my TV set. So Hanouna launched this show several years ago what's happened in the last few years is I want to say the last 5 years or so, is really he's reached kind of unprecedented levels of success. It's now the most highly watched talk show in France, not news program, but the most highly watched talk show. If you look at the slot that it competes in, people were kind of pointing out, well, maybe on some nights other shows do better, but still overall, this is the most highly watched talk show in France. And as you said, to some extent, we've seen this kind of story play out in the US, the politics as entertainment story, and using sort of the platform to drive viewers to the right. That exists, but I think there's also something of a kind of unique French style, which I think maybe before getting into the political content, I think just is worth stressing a little bit here, because there is something very French about it too. I mean, France doesn't really have this the American style kind of late night talk show where you have one person and then interviewing guests. In France, you have this kind of like variety show sort of kind of free-for-all format. And that's what Hanouna is. So he's the sort of host at the center of this kind of spectacle that happens every night, in which he's surrounded by recurring panelists. He has this kind of team of panelists that are there all the time, and then different guests that he'll bring on the show. And it's sort of this kind of free-for-all format that is designed to just generate sparks and disagreement. You'll pick issues, that can range from, it'll be a lot of sort of pop culture things, as trends on TikTok and Instagram, on Twitter. It'll be kind of gruesome crime stories they'll talk about as well a lot. So children being abducted and murdered, and discussing how horrible it is, and everyone talks about how horrible it is and how horrible it is. Someone's kind of likened it to something like Nancy Grace, right, in the US.
Oh, God, yeah.
To have that component to it.
Yeah.
Then you have kind of pop culture events, and a little bit of political news, kind of mixed in there as well, as if these kind of are all kind of just things that are happening that are on the same level. And so you have this this format which is designed to generate sparks. And I think in the story, I can go more into detail on any of these points, but I think in the story, the kind of argument that I tried to put forward is, I think on first glance, this can seem kind of harmless and sort of silly and just kind of dumb entertainment. And there's nothing, that's kind of what entertainment is. But I think there's something more heinous, really, that's at play here, and you can see it in a few different factors, and that's kind of what I try to outline in the Jacobin piece. One is this idea of, and I just referenced it, but this idea of having kind of political news just on the same level as entertainment. It's not unique to Hanouna, but it's certainly a big part of the show. This idea that the debate around, tax, wealth redistribution in the National Assembly is on the same level as, Instagram stars who are being made fun of for going to Dubai. That sort of equivalence, I think, is pretty bad. And then, beyond that, there is a real kind of right-wing spin on the show when they do talk about politics. So again, it's not the whole show, but when they do talk about politics, it takes on a definite right-wing flavor, and it does so in a couple of different ways.
So let's stop for a second, if I may interrupt you, Cole Stangler, just because, it's interesting to me that in a sense there's a French variation here, which is the way you describe it. I've not seen the show, but the way you describe it, it sounds like what he's doing is sort of taking vulgar entertainment of very, I don't mean to be a snob, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
The audience knows what I mean.
Yeah.
Taking vulgar entertainment, mixing it up in a big, mixing bowl, and then treating politics as just another piece of vulgar entertainment.
Yeah.
So it's the way you describe it, it's as if the subtext is politics is just nonsensical crap like all of this other stuff before he even opens his mouth to express a right-wing opinion. Is that a fair description of what you said? Yeah,
well, 100%. And I think it's you also have to keep in mind that we're talking about a French public too, that is becoming depoliticized, quote unquote, by French standards. We're having less and less voter turnout. Mm-hmm. closer to American levels historically. We had the lowest level legislative elections just earlier this year. Even in the second round of this year's presidential election, Macron versus Le Pen, a lot of people were just sort of sick of it and didn't vote. So you have this kind of reinforcement of this sort of political alienation, and the sense that ultimately, if you're watching this show, that politics is sort of like this other thing that you're kind of, it's kind of amusing, it's kind of grotesque, but it's just another form of the world, kind of another part of this kind of ugly world that we're living in.
Right, and it doesn't matter really any more than if a influencer goes to Dubai. Who cares? What about Hanouna himself? What is his story, his background?
Yeah, I mean, he's an interesting character because he's also taken on this kind of increasingly, I want to say, sort of like flamboyance in the last few years. Even in his presentation, his hair is dyed. He has this beard. This kind of his clothes are different, and that's kind of the reflection of his popularity. But Hanouna is the son of immigrants from Tunisia, so Sephardic Jewish immigrants. In Tunisia, fairly wealthy, middle to upper middle class immigrants in France, which I think is just worth stressing. His socioeconomic background, only because Hanouna has sometimes tried to portray himself as sort of this kind of rags to riches, poor immigrant, which isn't really a reflection of his family's socioeconomic background. And again, that shouldn't really matter, but it's only because he tries to portray himself and sometimes as this sort of someone who's in phase with the working class, that I think it's just worth stressing that a little bit.
Is it somewhat along the lines, occasionally you see a right-wing, a Republican, a billionaire-backed candidate who comes from an ethnic minority or whatever, and the idea is to me, I think that's what you described as one of the reasons to do it, particularly someone that might be a celebrity that didn't have political opinions, discernible opinions before, but another might be to pick somebody like that so that as a mouthpiece for things that would be unacceptable for a member of the ethnic majority to say. Is there an element of that in Hanouna, and you think in what he's doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair analysis to make. I mean, having someone who comes from North Africa, and can say they're from an immigrant background, when they're confronted with allegations of racism, or Islamophobia or even anti-Semitism, he can say, well, can you say this about my family? Look where I come from. I'm the son of immigrants myself. So yeah, I mean, I think that background, is probably an asset when it comes to putting out the sort of political content that he's putting out. And a key part of this, and I think you're getting to this point, but the sort of political aims of the show come into full focus when you look at the people that have been backing the show too. This is a show that has been broadcast on a channel, and really, I should say, the production company has been financed for years now by the Bolloré family, the family of Vincent Bolloré, who is one of the richest men in France. Something equivalent to sort of the Murdoch family, the Bolloré family, at least when it comes to their media empire. So they come from this again wealthy logistics family. This empire they've built around the world, and they've in recent years acquired media properties to try to advance what Bolloré has said himself. He's been quoted as saying this to close friends as leading what he calls a civilizational combat. So that's how he views his media properties. Bolloré is also perhaps better known for, and I've written about this before as of others in English now, Bolloré is also known for launching this news channel called CNews, which is sort of the equivalent of the French Fox News. Éric Zemmour, the far-right polemicist, became very prominent by working as a panelist on one of these shows on CNews. So in the Bolloré sort of vision of things, if you look at it from his perspective, you can have, so C News is sort of the news arm. You have Zemmour on the airwaves. Their news coverage is super right wing, and then Anuna, it's a little bit more subtle, but I think it's fair to say Anuna plays a different role, but in this kind of ecosystem of Bolloré and his aims to advance his far right agenda. Anuna is sort of the entertainment, the lighter side of this. He's someone who seems to be, he's constantly making jokes all the time. He's sort of lighthearted, and so Anuna is sort of the, another way of advancing this sort of, battle of ideas, this battle for cultural hegemony. To think about it in Gramscian terms, but.
As if Rush Limbaugh were the host of Entertainment Tonight or something, that kind of, and got in his little aside. So this is popular. What is that? I guess the logical question to ask about that, because to me, worrisome, but also fascinating. What does that tell Americans in particular about French culture that they don't already know, or many of them don't already know?
Yeah, I want to tackle that question. I'm gonna just add a few things before I get to that. I will get to that. Okay. But I think just to be more explicit, because I'm trying to think about, as a journalist, to try to make the case as strongly as I can. Just to get very explicit about how the show is far right. One is the guests that are selected. There's been a study about this showing that far right candidates received more attention in the run-ups to the presidential election and during the presidential election than their left-wing counterparts. In particular, Zemmour, Le Pen got a lot of attention from Anuna. So the candidates that are chosen, the people that are invited on the show, very clearly skew to the right. Secondly, the issues that are brought up as political issues that are debated are often framed in right-wing terms, or are framed or are issues that are the issues that are beloved by the far right. So, an example, it'll be things like: does France have an immigration problem? Does should we revisit should we revisit gay marriage in France?
Woke? Do they go after quote unquote woke and all of that?
That's definitely one of the issues that gets talked about. I was just looking at another one of just in more recent shows. I unfortunately watched a lot of this TV show for the story, but more recent examples. Just before the France-Morocco match, they had someone invited on the show saying that this is going to be civil war in France, the France-Morocco match, this sort of like far right fantasy. And okay, maybe you had people on the show saying, no, it's not going to be a civil war, but you're devoting 20 minutes of precious airtime to debating whether or not this football match is going to lead to, civil war and riots across France. And that's how you're advancing, your agenda. Doesn't matter if you have someone opposing the taking up the other viewpoint. You're having the debate in the first place. And so that's how it advances the sort of right-wing agenda. So just to be more explicit, I wanted to mention those two things.
Yeah, that's good, because I can't remember his name now, but in the 1980s there was a political scientist who wrote, and I think I'm quoting exactly, that the media can't tell you what to think, but they can tell you what to think about. Now, I happen to think sometimes they do tell us what to think, but they certainly can, and this is a case of telling us what to think about, right? Or telling the French people what to think about, as if these are the real problems of the day, right?
Yes, and Cyril Hanouna is someone who's absolutely obsessed with ratings. He talks about the ratings on his own show. He'll sometimes comment in live about how many people have been watching. He's totally obsessed with the ratings, which is to say, when he's inviting certain people on the show to talk about certain things, and when he's devoting 20 minutes of his beloved airtime to discussing something, it means that he really, really, really cares about it. These are not sort of flippant decisions. These are very well thought out decisions about who to invite and what to talk about.
Or his financial backers really, really care about it.
Yeah, and that's a tricky thing. I mean, people thinking about the show and discussing with people, there's this debate: is what about Hanouna himself? Is he actually far right? Is he voting for the far right? Well, I don't know. Maybe he just sees it as the entertainment. I don't really know. We can know if we know the answer to that question. He would say, Anuna would say, "Oh, well, look, I have all these, left wing friends. I brought them on the show. I'm not necessarily far right, but I think what it is Bolloré, the sort of man behind this empire, and his son Yannick Bolloré, who Anuna has described as his best friend, Anuna's best friend." See Anuna as sort of the perfect, avatar kind of figure to get their aims across, and whatever Anuna thinks himself, whether it's just for the ratings or whatever, maybe that's what's happening. But I don't know. I think at a certain point, it's hard to speculate about sort of what people think themselves. You can only see what sort of role they're filling.
Let's start with, so that's the payload. Okay. That's being delivered politically by this this entertainment missile. Okay. Why would this formula be so successful with the French people, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question. I don't know. I think
I'll tell you one reason why I ask, and this may or may not be germane. But first of all, my French grandmother, who not only didn't have a French sense of humor, she didn't have any sense of humor. But when drivers would cut her off, she would lean out the window. She was a little tiny woman with a gray French twist, and she would shake her fist and she would say, "Peace on you." Because if anybody ever got mad, she could just say, "I wished you peace." What's the problem? I mean, there is a certain vulgarity sometimes in French humor, as in all humor. A certain crassness. I think the American people, not more so than other people, but I think the American people sometimes kind of elevate the French in their minds, to a level of, to a height that they may not, they're just people, right? Cheap, dumb stuff entertains them too, number one. And number two, I guess, I remember when the whole very sensitive, after the Charlie Hebdo tragedy, that, there's a lot of back and forth about, well, the French have a different culture of humor and you can insult the weak and powerless because it's of course, it was a horrible thing that was done to them. But that's just, if you don't understand, then you don't understand laïcité and these other aspects of French culture. And it's, well, but I'm not sure they're that different. I mean, if I think it's crass, then I get to think it's crass. So I guess what I'm driving at here is, you could go back and analyze Rush and Fox News and the rise of that media force and say that it tapped into something very American, right? It tapped into a kind of individualism and patriotism and belligerence and nativism and etc. I'm trying to formulate a theory in my mind. I'm sorry to subject you to, the wheels turning, but, what does this phenomenon reveal in French culture? Is it a kind of crassness? Is it a irritation and frustration with how difficult the political and economic situation is? Is it just an effort to everything? I mean, do you have any sense about? It's not a fair question.
I think it's an interesting question. I mean, I think one way to look at it maybe is, I would say that Anuna's show is sort of, if we're trying to put it into a sort of style, and maybe you could say the style is more Western European. I don't know, but to me, it's sort of just classic kind of buffoonery. It's sort of this the buffoon style, excuse me, which is not. It's not the same thing as satire, where you're trying to criticize those in authority, but it's sort of the buffoons are sort of the court jesters, right? It's everybody. You're making a mockery of everybody.
Benny Hill,
fun of everyone at the same time, and that's I think what the show is. It's not sort of trying to make an intelligent commentary on power. It's just making fun of everybody. And at the end of the day, the rich and powerful can sit back and laugh at it too, and other people can laugh at it. But I think it's sort of classic buffoonery in that sense. But I'll say another thing, which I think in some ways, I don't know if this really answers your question, but if you want to try to understand the style, I think Hanouna is tapping into a style that we see, emerging in a lot of sort of a lot of countries, and I think characterizes the far right style in a lot of places, France, Brazil, the UK, which is this idea of the grotesque, I think. And there's a French writer who writes a lot about this, who's talked a lot about it, named Christian Salmon, who I highly recommend. I don't think his book has been translated into English, but he talks about the importance of the grotesque style. People like Berlusconi, Trump, Bolsonaro, who are just their function is to degrade and to discredit the political debate, and just kind of get down in the mud, right? And I think, and that can kind of actually appeal to people when you think everything is so corrupt and dirty. Yeah. Having someone who's willing to say it and doesn't treat the thing seriously can appeal to you, right? And I think in some ways Hanouna kind of captures the kind of this buffoonery, but also the kind of grotesqueness that I think underlies a lot of the far right. And I think that's maybe a key part of the style, because the whole show is just discrediting, making fun of, forcing you to get down in the mud, right? And I think that's one of the key kind of stopping points, I'd say.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, Cole. And maybe a loaded question after that, but is it entertaining? I mean, you had to watch a lot of it. Is it entertaining for people of, let's say, our leanings or whatever? Or is it just like appalling to watch? I mean, what was your reaction to it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's not really that fun to watch. There was one. It's kind of hard sometimes to understand, because everyone's yelling at each other at the same time when the debates get animated. There's one episode, and it's really why the trigger for writing the piece you had, and I'll tell the story very quickly. But you had a recently elected deputy from La France Insoumise, elected in legislative elections, young deputy who first came to prominence by being one of the panelists on Hanouna's show. So he was elected to the National Assembly, and he makes a return to the show as a deputy of the National Assembly. And at some point in the show, the MP, his name is Louis Boyard, he criticizes Bolloré's policies in Africa, and it turns into this screaming match between Hanouna and Bolloré. And people, I say this just to share the anecdote, but secondly, some people were sharing it as kind of proof of Boyard kind of shining light on Hanouna. But even it was so unwatchable because they're yelling at each other. It's not a fun thing to watch. So no, I don't particularly enjoy it, but I think if some people like it, and there's some entertainment quality there, and I think there's a kind of trolling quality to Hanouna as well, where he's kind of making fun of everybody, and that can be appealing. I personally don't like it, but I don't want to presume that my tastes are the apply to everyone.
Well, clearly not, because it's popular, right? So, and since you mentioned La France Insoumise, that's the dominant party on the left. It means what? France Unbowed or France Defiant or something along those lines, right? And
I've given up on trying to translate it. I just say La France Insoumise, and I think some people have just continued to say La France Insoumise.
Yeah, I feel most people translate it Unbowed, but my French isn't that good, but I feel like it's got a little bit more like edge to it than Unbowed. That word, that it's a little bit more like, we're not going to take your crap element to it, as opposed to I am Spartacus or whatever. But anyway, so that's the major party of the left. And overall the left seems to be doing okay. They're not winning, but they're gaining power, right? They're accumulating power, gaining strength at the legislative level. But you also, on your Patreon page, which we have to tell people about before you go, that party appears to be in disarray, right?
Yeah, this is a party that's, I don't know if it's that might not be an unfair characterization. They're facing the latest episode in this kind of inner turmoil that's been going on for some time. For a while now, people have talked about doing a revamp of the organization to tell the story quickly. A crucial issue to keep in mind here is La France Insoumise, the party of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, is a party that's done pretty well in the last couple of presidential elections, in 2017 and in 2022, following a very kind of top-down structure. It is a very top-down structure that's very effective in presidential campaigns. For some time now, the criticism has been mounting about how to try to make the organization more democratic, more accountable to members, because right now there really isn't a way to challenge the sort of top-down orders that come down from on high. And so there's been promises to revamp the organization. And what happened recently is an attempt to do that. And to make the story short, according to a lot of supporters of the movement, sympathizers, insiders, the effort really isn't going as far as it needs to go. Not only were a couple of people who have been critical of the organization while being part of it not included in the new leadership team. So that's Clémentine Autain, who's sort of a proponent of broad left unity, and François Ruffin, who's a documentary filmmaker who's sort of been likened to a French Michael Moore kind of figure. Both of them are not part of the leadership team. That might have been expected. But in addition to them, you have other high-ranking, well-known figures who've been excluded from the leadership team. And I think beyond the story of who's a part of it, who isn't a part of it, the bigger thing to keep in mind is this is an organization that is essentially continuing to follow this top-down model in which you have essentially Mélenchon, along with a couple of people at the very top, and no way to really influence the line in a democratic manner. And that's the challenge that the party is facing, and it gets tied up also in another issue, which is the succession of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, which is there was a sort of his hand-picked successor, someone named Adrien Quatennens, who's a young, very promising MP, who was then accused of domestic violence, then recently found guilty, convicted up to a suspended prison sentence. And Quatennens, these allegations, and then now him being found guilty, has created all other sort of contributed to the inner turmoil. And I think it's also reflective of this other issue, which is the lack of democratic accountability in the organization. People in La France Insoumise have tried to protect Adrien Quatennens, this promising young deputy, because he was sort of handpicked to be the successor. And so the fact that he's being protected also, I mean, this is also a question about a democratic accountability, in addition to being reflective of the problems of sexism and violence against women. But I think it's reflective of, again, of this other issue of the lack of internal democracy in the party. So the party is in a very difficult, going through a very difficult moment right now. And perhaps this turmoil that we're seeing, where you're seeing certain people that were in part of that inner circle now being critical of Mélenchon, perhaps this will usher in some reforms. I think that's what many people on the left can only hope for, but we'll have to see how it shakes out. But again, not a good kind of media, not a good moment that the party is going through altogether. Really can't be stressed enough.
You think it's affecting the momentum of the left overall, or too early to tell?
Well, I think we're going to see. I mean, this certainly doesn't help the party's image.
But I'm thinking beyond the party. I mean, there are other left parties as well, and there's a general left movement. And so I'm just.
Yeah, we have a what's going to be a big battle over pension reform. That's something we've talked about before. I feel like it's the recurring, never-ending issue in French politics. But we have the reform was actually supposed to be announced today. Formally unveiled today, but because of the success of the French national team, Macron decided that maybe it was not a good idea to announce the reforms right after to kind of steal the thunder from the team. So they're waiting until January to announce the reforms, and that's going to will have an inevitable showdown between the government and the unions in the streets. And what role will the left play? Will the left be able to benefit from the opposition to the reform? It's a question we've asked before. We'll have to see. One thing that is interesting when you look ahead to the pension reform is that you have all the major union confederations that have signed a document saying they're ready to protest together. That's something we didn't even see in the last round of pension reforms that was suspended because of COVID. So you have a very big battle coming up in January. And that could very quickly change the story from the dysfunction of La France Insoumise, and put the focus on the pension reform, but doesn't change the fact that this party still has some serious reform to do.
Really interesting as always, Cole. And I hope when the next wave of excitement hits in January that you'll come back and join us again. But once again, my guest has been journalist and author Cole Stangler. So as always, Cole, thanks for the great reporting. And as always, thanks for coming on the program.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.